The veil between worlds synopsis. Liam always believed his nightmares were just echoes of a restless mind. But when he starts waking up in impossible places, a desert beneath a liquid sky, a city where time runs backward, an endless corridor of floating doors, he realizes something is deeply wrong. Each night, his visions grow more intense. He is not just dreaming, he is being called. A hidden entity whispers his name, testing his limits, distorting his reality. What was once a world separated by sleep and wakefulness is now one and the same. When Liam finds a door marked with symbols only he can see, he understands that he can no longer ignore the call. But stepping through it means challenging the very nature of reality. He must uncover who is behind this deadly game before he loses himself forever. Because if there's one thing he has learned, some doors should never be opened. Liam felt the ground dissolve beneath his feet. The world around him made no sense. The sky was a mirrored ocean, reflecting landscapes that did not exist, while floating towers rose and fell on the horizon as if made of mist. The air smelled electric, like the moment before a storm, and every sound around him was muffled, as if he were submerged. He had dreamed of this place before, but this time, it didn't feel like a dream. His hands trembled as he reached out, touching the space in front of him. The air rippled like the surface of a lake. A shiver ran down his spine. He felt everything: the cold wind, the rough texture of the ground, the weight of his own body. Was this real? Then, a voice whispered, "You finally arrived." Liam spun around. The echo of the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, but there was no one there. Just distant shadows, floating buildings, and the endless sky. He tried to take a deep breath, but his chest felt compressed, as if the very air was pushing against him. Then, something changed. A door appeared, black, massive, covered in glowing symbols that shifted when he tried to focus on them. A faint light pulsed beneath it, like a living heartbeat. Liam had seen this door before, in his nightmares. And then, it opened on its own. The void beyond was not normal. It was alive, and before he could react, the world around him collapsed. Liam woke up with a gasp. His chest rose and fell rapidly, sweat dripping down his forehead. The room was drowned in shadows, the only light coming from the glowing numbers of the digital clock. Beside his bed, his heart pounded. It was always this time. He ran his hands over his face, trying to steady his breath. But then, he saw it. On his arm, just below his wrist, there was a mark, a thin, precise symbol, burned into his skin like an ancient sigil, the same symbol from the door. Panic crawled up his throat. This wasn't possible. This wasn't just a dream. What was happening to him? The heavy silence of the apartment pressed against his ears. And then, the knocking came. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at his front door. Liam froze. The air thickened, heavy, as if something was waiting on the other side. The knocking came again, and Liam knew, with every cell in his body, that if he opened that door, nothing would ever be the same. The knocks echoed through the darkness of the apartment. Each strike against the wooden door seemed to vibrate inside Liam's chest, pounding in sync with his frantic heartbeat. He didn't move. He couldn't. The air was heavy, too dense, as if space itself was folding in on him. His body knew before his mind could process it. Whatever was on the other side of that door was not human. Liam swallowed hard. Slowly, he slid off the bed, his bare feet touching the cold floor. Every step toward the door felt like an act of betrayal against his own survival instinct. The shadows in the corners of the apartment seemed deeper, shifting whenever he wasn't looking directly at them. But that was just his imagination, right? The knocking came again, louder, more impatient. Liam stopped in front of the door, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. He reached out with a shaking hand toward the doorknob, and then froze. Something was wrong. There was no sound from the other side, no breathing, no shuffling of feet, no indication that someone was actually there. And yet, he felt it, felt something watching him. Liam shut his eyes. Every part of his body screamed not to open it. But before he could decide, the door unlocked on its own. The hallway outside was too dark. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting unnatural shadows along the walls. The air carried that same metallic, storm-charged scent he had smelled in his dreams. And then he saw it, at the end of the hallway, another door. But not just any door, the black door, the same one from his dream. the one that should not be there. Liam felt his stomach turn. He knew that hallway. It led only to the elevator and the stairwell. But now, there was something new. Something that didn't belong to reality. The silence became suffocating. Then, a whisper drifted from inside the black door. Low, crawling. "You took too long, Liam." A shiver crawled up his spine. The hallway light flickered violently, and the door creaked open on its own. The darkness beyond reached for him before he could run. And then, everything shattered. Liam fell. Or at least, he felt like he was falling, his body weightless, spiraling through a void that had no beginning or end. The air around him was thick, like moving through liquid, pressing against his chest. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the nothingness. Then came the whispers, soft at first, like wind rustling through leaves. But soon, they became clearer. "He's here, finally. Now he must remember." Liam's pulse pounded in his ears. The darkness shifted, folding over itself like an ocean wave, and then impact. His back hit something solid. The pain shot through his spine, knocking the air from his lungs. For a few seconds, he just lay there, gasping, his fingers gripping the surface beneath him. It was cold stone. The scent of dust and something metallic like rust or blood filled his lungs. The air was heavy, pressing against his skin. Slowly, he pushed himself up and saw where he was. A corridor. Massive, endless. The walls were made of black stone, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, as if the stone itself was breathing. Mist curled along the ground, slithering like something alive. Liam's hands trembled. He was no longer in his apartment. He wasn't even sure if he was still in the real world. A sound echoed through the corridor, slow, rhythmic, footsteps. Liam froze. His breath hitched. He couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. But he knew one thing for certain. He was not alone. He turned and saw the shadow. It wasn't a person. It was something inside the walls. The stone shifted, symbols twisting and flickering, and something moved within them. Cracks, a shape, barely visible, slipping through the gaps like liquid shadow. Then, the whisper came again, right behind him. "You've been here before, Liam." His blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned around, and there it was. A tall, hooded figure, wrapped in a long, flowing cloak of pure darkness. The fabric seemed to bleed into the shadows, as if it wasn't made of cloth, but of something else entirely. Its face was hidden behind a smooth, white mask, featureless except for two hollow black eyes. Liam's heart pounded. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. Then it raised a hand and pointed. Liam followed the direction of its gesture. At the far end of the corridor, another door. But this one was open, and something beyond it was waiting for him. The figure finally spoke. Its voice was not a voice. It was inside Liam's mind, cold and endless. "Go forward." Liam wanted to run, wanted to wake up, but deep down he knew there was no waking up from this. He took a step forward, and as he did, the mist came alive, curling around his ankles like fingers pulling him deeper. The world around him shifted, bending to his choice. And when he passed through the door, reality shattered again. Liam stepped through the door. A rush of cold air wrapped around him like invisible hands, and for a brief second, he felt weightless. The corridor behind him dissolved into nothingness, swallowed by the void. Then, he fell. The impact was sudden. He landed on a hard marble floor, the cold seeping into his skin. A sharp pain jolted up his knees as he struggled to push himself up. His breath came in ragged gasps. And then, he saw the room. It was massive, too massive. Walls stretched impossibly high, vanishing into darkness. Every surface was lined with mirrors, each one cracked, their fractured glass reflecting countless distorted versions of himself. Liam's stomach churned. He had been here before, not in reality, but in his dreams. A whisper crawled through the silence. "You are beginning to see." Liam turned sharply. No one was there, just his reflection in the broken mirrors. Except one of them was wrong. His breath hitched. Among the fractured images, one reflection wasn't moving like the others. Liam took a step back. The reflection stayed still. His eyes were pure black. And then, it smiled. A smile Liam wasn't making. A sharp crack echoed through the room. One by one, the mirrors began to shatter, their pieces floating into the air, spinning like shards of a broken reality. The reflection in the glass stepped forward, crossing into the real world. It was him, but not him. Pale skin, Deep, sunken eyes, veins black like ink, and that same twisted smile. The reflection tilted its head. "You already know who I am." Liam didn't want to hear the answer. The air vibrated, like the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the figure in black appeared again, the hooded figure, the one with the smooth, expressionless white mask. Liam turned to it, desperate. "What is this? What's happening to me?" The masked figure pointed, not at his reflection, not at the broken mirrors, but at the center of the room. Liam followed the gesture. There, standing in the middle of the endless space, was a door. Not black like the others. This one was made of glass. And through it, Liam saw something impossible. Memories that weren't his. The reflection beside him grinned wider. "Now choose." The room exploded into light. Liam shielded his eyes as the room erupted in light. The glow burned through the fractures in the mirrors, illuminating the floating shards like tiny suspended stars. Then silence. The glass door stood before him. Through it, he could see visions, memories that didn't belong to him, cities that never existed, people he had never met, events he had never lived, and yet he knew them. Something deep inside him recognized those moments as if they had been erased, rewritten. The reflection beside him, the other Liam, laughed softly. "It's all coming back, isn't it?" Liam's throat was dry. "What is this?" The other version of him stepped closer, his black eyes glimmering. "A choice. The last one you'll ever make." Liam turned to the hooded figure, the one who had been guiding him through this nightmare. It remained still, mask smooth and unreadable. Then finally it spoke. "Step through, and you will see." The words rang in his mind, colder than the air around him. Liam looked back at the door. The images beyond it shifted, revealing something darker, not just glimpses of lives, but something deeper, something hidden behind the veil of his own mind. His breath came fast. His hands trembled. He had to know. Liam reached out, and as his fingertips touched the glass, the world shattered once again. The moment Liam's fingers touched the glass, reality collapsed. A deafening crack echoed through the void as the door shattered, its fragments spiraling outward like shards of a broken universe. A force powerful, ancient, inevitable pulled him forward, dragging him into the abyss beyond. He didn't fall. He was unraveled. Images, sensations, memories, not just his own, but those of countless others, rushed through him like a flood. Cities of impossible architecture, voices whispering in languages long forgotten, endless corridors filled with doors leading to lives he had never lived, but somehow remembered. And then it stopped. Liam stood in absolute silence. The darkness around him pulsed with something unseen, something alive. And then he saw it. A throne, massive, ancient, made of bones and shadow, pulsing with a dull, unnatural light, and seated upon it, himself, not the reflection, not the twisted version of himself from the mirror, but him, older, worn, eyes filled with a knowledge that sent a chill through Liam's spine. The seated version of him tilted his head slightly, watching him with something that wasn't quite amusement. "Now you understand." Liam's voice barely came out. "No, I don't." The older version of himself smiled. "You will." Behind him, the hooded figure stood in silence, watching, waiting. Liam turned back to the throne. The truth was sinking in, settling in his bones like a long-forgotten memory resurfacing. This place, this labyrinth, this endless maze of doors and illusions, was not a prison. It was a throne room, and he had been here before. The cycle was endless. The guardian of the veil always returned. And now Liam had one last choice to make. The shadows whispered. The throne called to him. He knew what would happen if he sat down, but if he didn't, he would never leave. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He took a step forward, then another, and as he reached the base of the throne, he made his choice. Liam stood before the throne. The closer he got, the heavier the air became, as if an invisible force was pressing against him, testing him. The massive seat of bone and shadow pulsed faintly, alive in a way no object should be. His older self watched in silence, seated upon it like a ruler of something Liam was only beginning to comprehend. The truth was sinking in, suffocating him. This was not a nightmare. This was not a prison. This was a passing of power. Liam had always been meant to return here. His breaths came shallow. His hands trembled. He turned to the hooded figure, who stood motionless in the periphery, its white mask unreadable. "Tell me this isn't real." The figure didn't answer. Instead, his older self leaned forward, resting his elbows on the throne. "You already know the answer." Liam swallowed hard. Behind him, the doors he had passed through, all of them, were gone. There was no way back, no way forward, only this. His eyes drifted to the throne again. If he sat down, if he took the seat, he knew he would no longer be the same. But if he refused, what happened to those who denied the veil? A deep, rumbling whisper filled the space, like the universe itself was exhaling. The shadows around the throne stirred, shifting like sentient beings. Liam clenched his fists. He had fought so hard to escape, to wake up, to return to something normal. But there was no normal. There never had been. His older self gestured to the throne. "It's time." Liam felt his pulse slow, his fear numb. Somewhere deep inside him, he knew this moment had already happened before. This was not a choice. It was a cycle, and the moment he realized that, he stepped forward. The moment his body met the throne, a violent wave of energy erupted outward, consuming everything. The darkness around him folded inward, the veil shifted, and Liam changed. The moment Liam sat on the throne, the world broke apart. The shadows that had loomed at the edges of his vision surged forward, swallowing everything in a violent collapse of reality. His body froze, his muscles locking in place as an unseen force wrapped around him, holding him to the throne like invisible chains. And then the memories came, not just his own, thousands, millions, endless lives, visions of people he had never met, places that had never existed, and moments from other versions of himself poured into his mind like a flood, drowning every last trace of the person he thought he was. The weight of it was unbearable. He wanted to scream, but there was no air in his lungs. He wanted to move, but the throne had claimed him. The veil was reshaping him. The hooded figure stood before him, watching in silence. No words were needed now. Liam understood. He was not the first, and he would not be the last, because the guardian of the veil must always exist. The truth settled deep in his bones. The labyrinth was not just a prison or a passage. It was the boundary, a thin, fragile line between worlds, between realities that should never touch, between the known and the unknowable. And now, he was its keeper. The voice of his older self echoed through the vast emptiness. "You fought so hard to escape, but there was never anywhere else to go." Liam's fingers curled against the arms of the throne. His skin was different, now darkened, marked by shifting sigils that pulsed beneath his veins like living ink. The power of the veil coursed through him, and with it, the knowledge of all who had sat here before him. His past life, the life of an ordinary man, was gone. The world of dreams and reality had merged, and he was its guardian now. Liam lifted his gaze. The labyrinth stretched before him, endless. Far away, in the distance, a door appeared. Another soul had found their way here. Another traveler, lost between dreams and waking life, stepping unknowingly into the path that had led Liam here. And as the guardian, he would be waiting. The cycle had begun again. It always did, and it always would. Liam's body no longer felt like his own. He sat on the throne of the veil, but he was no longer the same man who had first entered the labyrinth. His veins pulsed with an ancient energy, his mind stretching beyond time, beyond self. The labyrinth was not just around him, it was inside him. And now he understood everything. The doors, the voices, the impossible landscapes that blurred the line between reality and dream. This place had never been a prison. It had been a summoning, a test. And now, as the new guardian, Liam could feel it. Someone else had arrived. Far away, in the shifting corridors of the veil, a door creaked open. A new traveler had stepped through, unaware of what lay ahead, just like Liam had. Just like all the others before him, the labyrinth was calling again. It always did. Liam exhaled slowly, his fingers gripping the arms of the throne. The shadows moved at his command. The shifting walls of the maze responded to his will. He was no longer lost. He was the one who waited. The cycle was beginning again. And this time, he was on the other side of it. The whispers in the darkness grew louder. Liam leaned back in the throne, watching as the next lost soul took their first step into the unknown. Now it was his turn to guide them. Liam no longer felt time. It did not pass here, not in the way he once understood it. Seconds, minutes, years They had no meaning within the veil. He sat on the throne of the guardian, his mind stretching beyond the boundaries of the labyrinth, beyond the dreams and realities he once called his own. He was watching and waiting. Far away, across the endless corridors of shifting stone and mist, a new door opened. Another soul had arrived. A traveler, lost between the waking world and something deeper. Someone who, like Liam before them, had stepped through without knowing what lay ahead. The whispers welcomed them, the same whispers that had once called to him. Liam leaned forward, his fingers tracing the arms of the throne. The labyrinth shifted around him. The next chapter of the cycle had begun. This was how it always happened. This was how it always would. Liam had fought so hard to escape. Now he was the one who waited on the other side, the guardian of the veil, forever. And as the new traveler took their first hesitant step forward, Liam whispered into the abyss, "You took too long." The door closed behind them, and the cycle began again.